You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
What physical basketball
I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched it on YouTube.
Anyway.
I saw the games. I watched the games.
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball most days, but not today.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth, welcoming you to episode 38, The Football Show, live. Recorded and live on the afternoon of August 29th, 2025. So, Robert, we have a very special guest today and a very special topic today that we do this once a year so far. I mean, we did it once last year, and I guess this is just our turn at the bat again. It's
episode. It's the second annual episode that we're going to call Deities and Directors, which is kind of a play on Gods and Generals, which is technically a prequel, but moving right along. Our very special guest is actually, let's go ahead and bring him out here, and I'll give him a very brief introduction. He's got his three-time X's and Joe's jacket. He's the inaugural member of the club. He is the General David Sarnhoff of the Back Home Network. Although he's nothing like General Sarnhoff. And the reason I bring that up is because the documentary Ken Burns did after his one on the Civil War was Empire of the Air, where he actually talked about Sarnoff, Armstrong, and DeWitt in the battle over radio. So since we're going to be making copious numbers of Ken Burn references today, because we do like to talk of a civil war between the Big Ten and the SEC, Galen, we welcome you.
It's great to be back, guys. Is there a badge that I have to stitch to my blazer moving forward on this? I think that might be the way to go on things.
No, but what you do have to do the next time someone passes you, then you have to give the jacket to them. So that's the way
fair. I think that's harsh, but that's fair. Hopefully it's a candy striped jacket, though. I think that Masters style, but with the X's and Joe's branding. Seriously,
yeah.
We might. So since actually we have a great place to give it to you, because I guess 1 week from now I'm going to be picking Mike up. Actually, Mike will be already picked up from the airport, and we'll probably be sitting at the Briar and the Burley at that moment, getting ready to go see something happening. There's something happening that's not like it's not a Bay City Rollers fan club reunion or something. This is actually something going on next Friday that Mike and I are going to be at.
That's right. And I'm so honored to have both of you guys out for this and everybody else. But to pop the graphic up, we've got Crimson Cast Live that's going to be at the Buskirk Chumley Theater right down the street from Briar and Burley, the 5th of September, Friday at 7 p.m., doors at 6:30. Guys, this is one of those crazy ideas. It's like, hey, let's take the podcast and turn it into a stage presentation. So we're going to give it a shot. We're going to have some special guests on stage. We got Mitchell Page, who everybody knows and loves as a guest on the podcast, and of course the former IU wide receiver. Griffin Gonzalez, who's our field mic guy for football games that everybody loves, is going to be up on stage with us as well. But Scott and I and others, Ryan Phillips, going to be there as well. We're going to be talking IU football. We're going to be previewing the season, even though we'll be one game in, but we'll have a game to talk about at that point, which will be great. And we're just looking forward to having fans out to cover, everything that they want to talk about. We'll have a Q&A session with the audience, and I think it's just going to be a lot of fun. It's one of those things that I've always been curious about, and that we've seen, like I grew up listening to Men in Blazers. I've grown up listening to the Bill Simmons podcast. They've moved their podcast into live shows, and it's a different kind of vibe, but it's also the same kind of vibe at the same time. So I'm just excited to spend some time with you guys and spend time with everybody else. It should be a lot of fun.
It should be. Yeah, and just Galen, just for our reference, how long do you think it will be? Like an hour and a half, maybe?
About an hour and a half is what we're aiming for. I mean, even I have my limitations on the amount of time I'm able to talk. And so it's we're going to start at 7. Tickets at $15. We do have discount code available for anybody that subscribes to the Back Home Network. So hit us up on the socials if you're interested in that. And I got you guys comped, so please don't buy any tickets. And we are looking forward to about 90 minutes, and then we will migrate to some kind of an establishment nearby afterwards for libations and debrief.
Yeah. Basically a post game wrap of the event.
The after party.
I like an idea of a wrap party. I like an after party.
It's like the governor's ball for.
Essentially, it's where all the actual business gets done, as we've seen over and over again in the history of man.
I was gonna say it's like a student government campaign party without the excise cop showing up. That's usually because usually, as Mike and I can attest to.
Yeah, well, I can't attest because I got out of there before then. So.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean,
there's always one person that left. It's like, the Rolling Stones famously get busted in 1967 at Keith Richards' house because Rupert Murdoch's newspaper is after them and is trying to make an example out of them. But they waited to go in until George Harrison had left. Yeah, because busting a Beatle. Oh yeah. No, you need to do a deep dive into this.
Okay. I'm doing. Yeah.
Arresting a Beatle would have destroyed the minds and hearts of thousands of teenage girls in the 60s. But, the Stones, they were easy to cast aside into the pit of the justice system. So,
and Marianne Faithfull.
You know the story clearly, Mike. We're going to leave that we'll talk about at the after party, but
that's
not here.
The after dark version.
I will be reading my briefing book on this event regarding my favorite Beatle, the great George Harrison. The man that the greatest collaborator in rock and roll history, I might add.
Yes, and one of the prickliest people under the radar that you'll ever see. It's funny because one of the issues with Bob Marley is that people feel like Bob Marley was a revolutionary figure. He was very anti-establishment, but his record label post-death essentially tried to turn him into kind of like the Jamaican Santa Claus, One Love and all of this. And that's kind of the image that George Harrison has, where it's like, Hare Krishna and all of the spiritual stuff. But George could be a bit of a jerk on purpose. And that's what made him endearing.
Yeah, it really was. And I will say that my son will ask for, Dad, play Give Me Love. He'll say, Give Me Love. And he wants Give Me Love because he loves the Jeff Lynne version that he did at the thing. I mean, so it's amazing stuff. But yeah, he definitely does have that sort of dichotomy of personnel, as we like to say.
Yeah.
So before the after party and probably after the Briar and the Burley, I know, Mike, you and I, we got to stop by, Trax Records, the old Trax Records. There's something there, isn't there?
There is, apparently, and this is what I was going to ask you, Galen. Like, how many times have you been there now since it's opened?
I mean, it's tempting. I've probably been 6 times since it opened, and they continue to add new things to the store, which I'm really heartened by. It's great. It's a great story all the way around. Home field in there now, partnered with Trax, and we had a great story last night on Crimson Kickoff. We had that inaugural episode where the owner, he bought it and immediately was like, I want Home Field to come in and partner with me on this. And it took a little bit of thought on that front, but they were like, yes, this sounds like an awesome idea eventually. And it's great because the one hang up I have as an OG Home Field consumer is I've basically got everything already that's in that store. And so I'm like waiting is like, what are they going to release that's new? But it's a great setup. It still looks like the Trax space, but more modernized, which it probably needed after having been opened in 1988. It's a good turning over of the aesthetics, but it's still, you got the records in the back. You got the merch, the old Trax merch is still there, but you've also got all the Home Field stuff. And that is really cool to see.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm curious, Galen, now when you go in there, I mean, is it like Sinatra going into the Copa? Do you have like your own little private side door and a private room in the back? You can see the newest stuff around.
It's actually no, it's like the tracking shot in Goodfellas, actually, where they
exactly what I was referencing. Yes,
they walk me through the Village Deli parking lot, and I wind through the supply closet, and yes, it's. So I can't reveal everything that I know, but that's a nice touch. It's awesome. The music pops on. You got Bobby Darin playing in the background. It's excellent.
Awesome.
Henny Youngman's actually at the back of the club telling jokes to begin with. It's actually good stuff.
Take my crew neck, please. Yes. Yeah. No. It's.
So check out check out not just Homefield at www.homefieldapparel.com, but also check out Homefield at Tracks in Bloomington, either en route to Crimson Cast Live here in a week.
Yes.
So when we come back, we're going to start digging into IU. And I'm also going to remind you right now, remind me to get the coffee on Saturday morning, please.
Oh yes, this time I'll make sure we don't forget that one. So
don't let me hit the accelerator till we stop by and got the coffee, because that was a whole damn thing last time we were in Bloomington together. We'll talk about it later on X's.
Exactly.
When the final buzzer sounds in Bloomington, the conversation starts here. The assembly call is IU basketball. Live post-game shows, smart midweek breakdowns, and no empty hot takes. Jared Morris, Coach Brian Tonsoni, Andy Bottoms, and Ryan Phillips dissect lineups, sets, and recruiting so you know what really happened and what it means for the Big Ten season, March, and beyond. Join the live chat on YouTube, then catch the podcast on Spotify and Apple. Just search Assembly Call and be part of Hoosier Nation's most trusted post-game tradition.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Bob Moats with my good friend Mike Wiemuth and our good friend Dr. Galen Clavio. And I'm going to start with this question of, was it real? Last year, did it really happen? Am I going to wake up and have to point to, Ray Bolger and some others and be like, and you were there and you were there and you were there and realize that it just was a fantasy, but it really happened, right?
I mean, it was real and it was spectacular.
It was.
I mean, it's one of those things. I thought about this a lot when we were doing our previews for this year. And one of the things I keep coming back to was something that I started saying on the podcast about halfway through last year, which was savor this if you're an IU football fan. Whether you had been and especially if you were a long-time IU football fan, but also if you were just jumping on the bandwagon, but you root for other IU sports and you'd never felt like you had a compelling reason to root for IU football before. Because last year, it didn't dawn as a season where everybody was expecting great things. Like I predicted we'd go 8-4 before the season started, and many people felt like I had gone too far out on a limb. But what we found as we got into October was that what started as a promising season snowballed so quickly into something that exceeded our wildest dreams of avarice that I don't think got a chance to fully appreciate it in the moment unless we were really intentional about it. And whether it was the win against Maryland when the crowd really got into it heavily for the first time, or the win at UCLA, or for that small group of people that were up in Evanston that got a chance to see IU beat Northwestern at Northwestern, whether it was that sold-out game against Nebraska when Indiana just absolutely hog-tied them and threw them in the river, whether it was game day coming the following week and the entire Washington game being kind of this fever dream, whether it was that Michigan game, the snow globe game where we beat Purdue by the largest margin in school history. Like all those moments happened. Like bang, 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 bang. There was hardly any break. And what I've taken to telling IU fans is I hope you were able to savor some of that in the moment, because this season could be just as good results-wise. And I think we'll have a lot more fans that are more bought in. But for those of us who were there, it'll never quite feel that special again. And that's just the nature of things. It's like being there for the Beatles' first tour, Bob, to use what we were talking about earlier, as opposed to being there for the last one. You'll always feel like you were part of something emotionally special and different, and it's hard to recapture those things. That's what I took out of that, and that's why it's like, yes, I have to pinch myself occasionally that it all happened, but it's amazing that it happened, and I want to confirm that, yes, I was there. It did indeed occur.
I mean, we watched, yeah.
Yeah, there was I'm definitely with Galen on that. And yeah, I would say that just from our perspective and terms of like how we have done our shows since we started X's and Joe's. I think it's really nice for us to discuss things like the chip stack theory with an IU coach where the stack is actually growing and not quickly eroding.
Yeah.
And so it's just giving people the sense of like, yeah, no, the chip stack theory actually works both ways. It works on the positive and the negative side. And with Signetti, it's been just a really great lesson in seeing like, okay, this is what it looks like when it's actually working. This is what it looks like when the momentum is going in the right direction.
So I love the chip stack theory. I think we've talked about this a little bit on this show, but I think when people think chip stack theory, they think poker. And I look at Signetti and the first year at IU as craps at a really hot table where, all the right bets were made that first year leading into it. He had the right combo bets in the middle of the table and the chips just went like that. And I mean, right now the guy could probably run for mayor and have a pretty good chance of winning and could probably also be president of the university and nobody would bat an eye. That might be a little bit hyperbole, but like the popularity is there and deservedly so. I mean, this is the football equivalent. I don't even know. I'm not sure what the historical reference would be for someone coming in and taking over, perhaps the most moribund football program in FBS power level historically and doing what he did. It defies, if you wrote it down on paper, someone would say this is not possible. And it's, I think, an interesting augmentation to the chip stack theory, because I don't know that what Signetti did would have been possible even 4 years ago. It took a combination of him getting hired and being able to bring his entire staff, because IU desperately needed a financial and energy kick, and they couldn't afford to micromanage the hiring, so they needed to let him bring his whole setup in, and I think he was waiting for an opportunity where he could do that. It took the right sequence of jobs opening and not opening so that this was the most attractive job on the market, largely because of the television revenue. It took the transfer portal being where it was at, and it took IU being able to spend money to attract players that would have otherwise either left the roster and gone elsewhere or not come from James Madison. So all those things had to be in place, and then you had to have the schedule lay out the way that it did. I mean, this is like a comet hitting the sky, like at the same time that a meteor shower hits the sky, at the same time there's an eclipse. Like, I don't know that you could have had that combination of things. So whatever the benefits were, like chip stack wise, what I find fascinating is like he maximized all of those. There were so many multipliers that you could have never predicted. So that's really exciting to watch. And it's tough because I don't know that any other coaches in other sports, especially basketball, will ever have that lineup of things available to them.
Well, and I would just say, historically, I was thinking about this earlier, like, what's a good historical comparison? And then I think for me, it was like when Grant took over the army of the Grand Army of the Republic in the Civil War, when Lincoln finally just said, okay, he drinks, but he fights. And he found the right guy at the right time after making a bunch of mistakes from the beginning of the war with guys like George McClellan all the way through Joseph Hooker and Ambrose Burnside, whose legacy are sideburns and another thing, being the namesakes for those. I think for this situation, it's like, you get the right guy who basically comes with the right attitude, because coming out of the Allen years and even before then, we'd always kind of just said, we'll be okay. Like when we talked about 8-4, we always thought 8-4 was the ceiling for this program. Like the base expectations for Indiana football have been make a bowl game, and every once in a while we'll be 8-4, maybe 9-3, and we'll go to a New Year's Day-ish bowl game, and that's good enough. And we bring a guy in who says, no, that's not good enough. We're going to be a national contender. Much like Grant, unlike the other generals, like when they lost the Battle of Fredericksburg, they hopped up and went right back across the Potomac and regrouped. When Hooker lost in the Wilderness, same thing. Then Grant, he comes in, they lose his first battle in Virginia. He marches. He doesn't go backwards. He goes forwards. And that's where Signetti is. It's more about competence. It's more about than it is projecting and projecting confidence through competence and expectation of winning versus, boy, we just have to teach these guys how to compete and win. There's a different shift in this program that you've seen in the last year where, yeah, we're 10-0. Okay, move on.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be one of the things I've really grown to believe over time, and a lot of what Mike and especially Mike's numbers, but also just the way that you two talk about things. There is a formula to this stuff that works, but there's also a ton of coaches out there who claim that they have a formula that works. And so you are, as an athletic director, most athletic directors don't have the ability to effectively vet people as far as whether they will be able to put what they claim they can do into practice. And that happens in basketball, it happens in football. And I think that part of the problem in football, historically, even taking Indiana out of the equation, is that when you hire a coach who's long on motivation but short on order, it's not too different from having a bad general in a military setting who might have one skill set, but they lack the logistics and the logistical management that really an army runs on. And that's essentially what football is. I mean, football, what's the old saying? Football is violence punctured by committee meetings.
Yeah.
But committee meetings are really important in that that's where the organization comes from. And what's impressive about not just Cignetti, but his whole staff, all the way down to the quality control people, is that there is a right way to do things. And this is what Nick Saban does. And this is what Bill Belichick did when he was at New England. And there's a certain mode. And, you'll hear people say, oh, there's a lot of different ways to win football games. And it's like, well, but there's a consistency that's needed. And then you plug in Indiana, to go back to what you were saying, Bob, who never felt like they needed to be good at football, never felt like they needed to take it that seriously, because their alumni were largely interested in a different sport. And that was, of course, men's basketball. And as long as you were good enough in men's basketball, that tended to, people just didn't care. It's like, fine, we're not good at football, we're average at football, or hey, they won 7 games this year. What a miracle. And that was the mentality that had to change first. Like the idea that the athletic department had to say, we cannot financially afford to be bad at this sport anymore. We will be relegated across the board if we don't take it seriously, and we have to hire a person who can basically transplant an entire organizational culture in, and then hope that filters down to the players. And what I find fascinating about the Cignetti experiment right now is that it's not just the on-field, product that's changed, but look at the recruiting that's going on right now. Look at the top 6s that are being announced for a lot of really good players across the country. IU suddenly finds themselves in recruiting battles against programs that we would have never dreamed that they would have been recruiting against. The Auburns, the Tennessees, the Penn States, the Nebraskas, the programs with national profiles who regularly attract 4 and 5 stars. Recruits aren't dumb. Parents aren't dumb. They know how the game is played. If they have if they're a player or they have a son who's playing at that level, they know what programs not to take seriously and what programs to take seriously. And the fact that Indiana is in the conversation and in some cases is the commit choice for several of these 4-star players. 5 stars are kind of a separate category in football, but the fact that Indiana is in the conversation illustrates that it's not just us perceiving this change, it's also a change that's being perceived by people who have no other ties to Indiana other than, I want to go play football somewhere where I'm going to have my talent maximized.
Right. Yeah, it's what makes it extra interesting is that it's happening in year 2.
Yeah.
Like you're basically getting to that maximum point in recruiting, or did I say maximum, but you're basically getting to where you always hope you want to go in year 2. Whereas in the past it would be I hope by year 4 or 5 we're actually competing with those other peers within the conference. I think that's the one thing that makes Cignetti's time at IU so strange in terms of kind of the research that I do. I always talk about honeymoon periods. Well, you look at Cignetti now, and you see that now people are going to be pointing to his tenure at IU now as the argument that our coach does not need 3 or 4 years. Look what Cignetti did at Indiana. Why aren't we there now? And so, and it's even for like IU fans, I think it's a little bit strange to observe. I mean, think about that. There's that time period between, let's say, when a coach is hired and they coach the first game in their career at the school to the point of where you can say they made it. They had some kind of like, payoff. In the Tom Crean example, the gap between his first game at IU and the Watt shot was 3 years and about 2 months. Mm-hmm. For Cignetti, the gap between his first game and ESPN Game Day showing up in Bloomington is about 8 weeks. Yeah. So these kind of tenures that are very unusual, where a guy comes in, is just literally setting the program on fire, is really kind of eliminating this whole idea of there being a prolonged honeymoon period. And yeah, I mean, honestly, in the kind of work that I look at, I almost kind of like putting a little asterisk next to Cignetti and say, okay, what is this one example? What is this one weird outlier going to look like? Is it going to go to rise up? Is it going to be able to compete like head to head with the Alabamas of the world, or is it going to kind of level out a little bit? Is it going to fall? I mean, it's very interesting, but I'm really glad that it's just happening to happen to my favorite college football team.
You hit the nail on the head. This feels like something that happens to somebody else, not to Indiana. And especially with football, I mean, that's the other complicating factor. It's not just this meteoric rise overnight. It's that it happened at Indiana, which was weighted down by, a history, 120-year history of just minimal results at best and really embarrassing results. I mean, when you trail the University of Chicago in win percentage in the conference, and they haven't played football at Division I level since 1946. Like that hurts. So everything you said is right, Mike. And the one thing though, and this is where it's going to be fascinating, the window for what Cignetti has done at Indiana, I think we'll look back 10 years from now and be like, there was about a 3-year window when that could have happened because of all the other things that were going on in college sports at the time. Because you think about like IU, they had to have that coach available. They had to have players available that could come in. They had to have a mechanism to bring those players in. They had to have the ability to essentially tell players that they no longer wanted, that they needed to leave and go somewhere else, and have that be a possibility, which again, the transfer portal works both ways. And it had to happen at a moment when Indiana's schedule lined up to where you could get enough wins to build the momentum to get a game day here 8 weeks after you launch the season. And that required UCLA to be underperforming, Maryland to be underperforming, Nebraska to be, it's funny. We joked last year, Nebraska was great until IU beat them 6-7. Then suddenly they sucked.
Yeah.
Washington was in the championship game and they were great until Indiana beat them. Then they sucked. So Indiana still hasn't gotten credit for beating Michigan, even though Michigan turned around and beat Ohio State and Alabama. But all of those things had to be in tandem. So this is one of those things where, like, like a comet crosses the sky in the 1400s, and it's an omen, and a king is able to reign for 40 years because of that one moment. That's kind of look, again, this never happens to IU. I feel like we've gone the opposite direction in basketball on some of these things where everything's gone wrong. So I'm happy to just take the providence as it's dropped upon us, and almost this is the classic, like, never look a gift horse in the mouth, or is it? Oh, I forget if it's always or never, but whatever the never is, that's what this is.
Don't take it for granted is what you're saying, and exactly kind of where we are with this. And
don't take it for granted, but don't read the instruction manual. Those are kind of
My wife will tell you that those are words I live by. Never read the instruction manual. There's nothing duct tape and a sledgehammer can't fix around here. So but looking at this, couple things. I think a good example would be Florida in basketball about 20 years ago when Billy Donovan took over. That flips a script almost, where when you flip that script and you go from, and really the word I was thinking when you were talking about IU football, Galen, was futility. It always felt like it was an exercise in futility. Like, we're going to luck ourselves into a Rose Bowl sometime within 100 years of Harry Gonzo being the quarterback, and it'll be the greatest moment in our institution's history. Was kind of how we not grew up through it, but we kind of went through the mindset, but of IU football. But
yes, I'm not to interrupt, but I remember hearing you say on a podcast, I might have been on it, about you and your role in student government meeting with Miles Brand. Miles Brand wasn't asking if we had any athletes on the football program, but he was asking about what athletes we had on the basketball program, which I think illustrates the institutional problem that had to be solved.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. And again, Miles looked at it from a standpoint of basket, but he also knew that they had to do a little better in football, which is where he was going with this. He was looking to kind of up with the IU Circle logo and all the other stuff that came in with Cam Cameron, which kind of goes back to this whole thing of right behind you, Galen. By the way,
I don't know if you guys know this. That was a gift from Jordan Owen. Really? That is the old WTIU show foam oval from the Cam Cameron show.
The Cam Cameron show, not Big Red Football. The Cam Cameron show.
It might have been Big Red Football, but that was
that was always a tradition in Sunday mornings at our house. Was I'd pop that on and watch and watch I formations going into 3 yards in a cloud of dust in those eras. But I think the other thing about Cignetti was, so you have this paradigm where it's like nobody, it's never really been a big thing at IU. All of a sudden now you're talking about national contending, much like a Florida situation in basketball 20 years ago. Now you got to retrain a fan base.
Right.
Well, now you have to retrain a fan base, and you have to train this fan base and be like, okay, stop going to your cars at halftime and not coming back. Other coaches have tried it. Hasn't worked. Telling the students, you need to show up, don't study, which nobody in history probably would have actually tried to do before that, knowing the institution's mindsets towards that, that issue there. It was really kind of a move in that direction of saying, we need for you to, if you want to be a big person program, a big boy, big girl program, you got to act like it.
Yeah. And Florida's even maybe not a perfect analog, because Lon Kruger took them to a Final Four in the 90s. And, and so it's one of those things, I almost liken it more to Bruce Pearl at Tennessee. Yeah. Because that was a school that, while it had, great players on an intermediate basis, Allen Houston went there. Mm-hmm. It wasn't really a basketball school, and more people went to women's basketball because of the success Pat Summitt had down there than men's. Mm-hmm. And it took Pearl to change that culture. And to their credit, one coaching era perhaps not contributing, but Rick Barnes has turned that into a school where they care. They're never going to care about basketball quite as much as they care about football, but they still care about basketball a heck of a lot more than they ever used to. It may be a harder sell here, and one that's going to take longer, because of IU football fandom. The idea of being an IU football fan was almost like a negative meme in the eyes of a lot of people. And, we've had media members joke about, this is why we don't cover football. It's just been this thing where one of the big controversies that I don't think is getting talked about much, but there's a lot of people who have been buying football tickets just so they could get the priority points so that they could use them in support of their basketball tickets. That's changed because now you got to pay a PSL to get football tickets in the first place. There's just a lot of cultural things. And what's fascinating to me as a person who studies this stuff and as a historian of sorts is this is something that is really going to be focused on the younger generation. This is going to be Gen Z's moment, and increasingly Gen Alpha's moment if this becomes a growing proposition. I don't know. I'm a weirdo. My dad was a huge IU basketball fan, but he was also an IU football fan. He was at the Rose Bowl, or not the Rose Bowl. He was at the bucket game in '67 that got them to the Rose Bowl. He would bring me down to football games in the 80s because we couldn't afford, the time to come down to basketball games. It was hard to get tickets. Most people didn't have that upbringing. They rooted for IU basketball and Notre Dame football. It was just not a thing that they would do. And so we're now building a group of people for whom perversely, like basketball fandom is almost disposable because they just haven't had success over the last 25 years. And we've just dropped a football program that went to the college football playoff, could go again this year if the chips fall right. That's going to increase the affinity for that program. And I'm fascinated over the next 10 years to see what impact that has. But it also brings up a challenge with football because football is expensive, far more expensive than basketball in terms of, how much you're paying players, how much money you got to pump in. There is no older mega donor that loves IU football the same way that you have those people that love IU basketball. Or if there is, I haven't seen them yet. You haven't seen we've had great donors in football, don't get me wrong, but we're talking about like FU money donors, like people who come in and drop $100 million on a new press box just because they'd like to have their name on something. Like I think that's going to be a really fascinating thing to watch, because as much as the children shall lead us, so to speak, in terms of that evolution of the fan base that you're talking about, and it'll upset the older heads who don't really care that much but are kind of being led along to it. You've got to have somebody who's like, I really want to put some money behind this, because that's what you get in a lot of the schools that Indiana is going to be competing with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also interesting, that's from the programmatic standpoint. I'm just as interested in what the fan base looks like literally the psychology of the fan base as they're going through this. And I know, Galen, on your show, I think you and Scott do a really good job of sort of like walking through like what you're thinking as things are progressing and like how you're reacting to things in real time, especially last year because it was such a big surprise. I just know that, in what the way I look at sports psych, I'm not a big baseball guy, but I've hung around enough Chicago Cubs fans to know that sports trauma is a real thing. It literally just kind of is like it hangs around like a black cloud over the heads of fans of particular teams that have lost a certain amount. And so I'm sort of curious about going to next year and, maybe the year after. At some point, no matter how good of a program you have and how elite of a coach you bring in, there's always going to be some regression point. It may be temporary, maybe just like, maybe a two or three loss year that comes after, your run to the championship or whatever it is. Something's going to happen in the future that's going to cause at least some people to say, oh, here it comes. Here comes the big tumble down.
Well, it's why listening to Galen earlier, some of your stuff, earlier, it's multiple people I had the same thought. Look, the Iowa game, which I think is, which we're all saying, okay, that's, Illinois is going to tell us something. Iowa's going to be the confirmation point. And then, so let's say that thing goes incredibly well. That's your best case scenario. Okay. Hey, pinch yourself. If it's real, it's going to continue. We have a chance for this thing continuing and rolling. If it doesn't, do you regroup, like Mike is saying, like that sports trauma mindset of, well, we lost Sutcliffe for the season in '85, so I guess we can't go back to the playoffs. Sort of mindset of, well, we're cursed, we're snake bit, we're doomed. That sort of thing that we're looking at. And I think that the big question is, if that happens, when that happens, Mike said, and I think I agree with Mike on that. When this happens, how do we respond? And that's really the fascinating question for us to look at.
It happened a little bit after that Notre Dame game where you had a bunch of IU fans hopping on Twitter and say, "Oh, they were paper tiger." That this, was like, and it was unsurprising. A lot of people who are hardcore longtime IU fans got incredibly angry, as they should have, at the IU fans who essentially corfed their way out of that. You guys familiar with corfing?
No, this is the thing the kids are saying, or am I missing something?
That's the thing that researchers say. There's this psychological phenomenon in the sports marketing research, berging and corfing, basking in reflective glory, where and that happened with a lot of IU season last year, where you glom onto a team that's doing well so that you can bask in the glory reflectively alongside the other fans and alongside those results. And then corfing is cutting off reflective failure, where You disassociate when things get tough. And this is a phenomenon that we've all observed in one way. You just described some of it with the Cubs. The problem is twofold. A, like the longtime hardcore IU football fans, this is a group of people, and I include myself in this group, that have been so heavily traumatized by the history of IU football that we all need years of therapy, even with last year. And I was disappointed with the way they played at Ohio State and at Notre Dame, but those were speed bumps. Those were not like heavily traumatic events. Like traumatic events are the Gator Bowl loss,
right,
or the Pinstripe Bowl loss, or going into the Wisconsin game in 2011 or 2012 with an outside chance at making the Big Ten title game if you won because of a series of weird things and losing 66-14. I mean, there have been so many mega trauma events that have occurred if you followed IU football deeply over time that you are incredibly calloused to those things. The problem is, like most of the new fans, they're coming in. It's actually great. I'm happy for these people. They are coming in. It's like eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, right? You're able to not have had all of that. I am curious what happens when the first stumble, when it shouldn't happen, occurs, and how those fans manage it. But I think you bring up a point. IU made the college football playoff last year. That is so incredibly unusual in the history of college football, period, because there just haven't been very many playoff teams. And even with the expanded playoff, Indiana, SMU, and Boise making that playoff, those teams experienced something that a ton of teams who have been much longer in the tooth as national powers have never gotten a chance to experience. And so you're coming from a small place of advantage, I guess, as a fan, because you've already experienced that if you hopped on the bandwagon. And look, I mean, is it like, could IU lose? They probably, looking at the way Wisconsin looked last night, they're probably not going to lose at home to Wisconsin, but could they lose at home this year to Michigan State? It's not out of the question. What do you do in response to that? I do think, though, that the problem IU's had historically is not that we've had those incidents and people have dropped off. It's that we've had 5 or 6 of those incidents in a season. The Gator Bowl year was followed by the COVID year. Those were 2 of the best result seasons in IU history. But then you go 2-10 the next year, and you lose all your momentum. IU plays 13 for Hep in 2007 after he passes away, and then they immediately revert back to going 3-9. Year after year. Every time we've lifted the program up just enough where people are like, oh, let's give this a shot, they've immediately been rewarded with failure after failure. And it's been a variety of reasons why. And so I think what's key and what we've been trying to get across to people is if Indiana goes 8-4 this year, that's not a disappointment.
That was the old ceiling.
Yes, that's one of the best.
That was the old
seasons.
ceiling.
That is one of the best seasons in IU history, if you go 8-4. And I think trying to get people's mindsets around that, and if you can do that, if you can consistently win 8-9 games and then have seasons where you win 10, 11, 12, that's where you raise the floor. And that's where fans, I think, are able to buy in and not like when you do have those stumbles. Now you're just like every other fan base that's got a good football program that occasionally trips up. That's where you build year after year, another 500 fans here, another 1,000 fans here, another 7,000 students that look at football as the main thing. And what's fascinating about IU and the sociology of all of this with IU is that used to be basketball. And now when you go to Assembly Hall, the student section is half empty unless they're playing Purdue. And it's ceased being the social necessity to be at those games that we experienced when we were students, and football largely replaced it last year. We went from the students leaving at halftime of the FIU game to the students packing the stadium for the entirety of the Big Ten season. That's what I'm fascinated to see this year, even after a loss.
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking about that whole idea of thankfulness, Galen, when you're speaking about fans trying to just enjoy the moment and enjoy just where you are now versus where you were. I remember, I guess it's the 1988 IU Ohio State game. I was at that game, and IU curb stomped Ohio State mercifully. That was that John Cooper's first year or something like that?
I think it was Cooper's first year.
It was,
Yeah.
We got Earl Bruce fired the year before when we beat him in Columbus.
Exactly. Yeah. Early retirement. So we're at the game, and Anthony Thompson, obviously we followed him because he's from our high school and all that. So in the fourth quarter, I was thinking like, all right, there's like 2 minutes left. Well, why don't we, just beat the traffic? Don't want to get stuck on 46, but going back to Terre Haute. I remember my dad literally said, "No, we're staying." And I was like, "Well, why?" He says, and he basically had to give me a little lecture of like, "Okay, let me give you the history of Indiana versus Ohio State football. This never happens. What you're at right now does not happen. So we'll be staying here, and you'll be enjoying this." And I was like, absolutely. And I'm so glad he did, because he was absolutely right. We never had a game against Ohio State like that day when I was there.
That was literally the last time we beat them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, because we tied them in 1990.
Yeah.
And we've lost every game to Ohio State since then. So, first of all, any dad saying we're not going to leave to beat the traffic, I salute you. Like that's just such an unnatural thing for most dads. So that's great. But yeah, that was a great move, because he's right. And that's one of those, it's why, I mean, nobody was going to leave that Michigan game early last year regardless, because of just how important it was and how tense it was and down to the wire. But it's why I didn't want to leave. I was not going to leave the bucket game early last year. Because yes, Indiana's beaten Purdue by large margins, but that was a historic win, and it was a win that guaranteed they were going to be in the college football playoff. And even though I think the kids were kind of miserable by the end of it just because of how cold it had gotten, it's like we're sticking around for this. And there's a cultural aspect to fandom that is more than just wins and losses, but the wins matter, because if you're there for fun wins and games that matter, they stick with you, just like that did so many years ago. And that helps to kind of cement the way that sport occupies your brain and your heart. That's really how I think fans have to process these things now. And what's interesting and what I find fascinating about Cignetti as a character is he realized early that this was a fan base that needed to be told what to do. Not a whole lot different than when Bob Knight came in with basketball, and that fan base essentially had to be re-educated on how to be basketball fans that attended in mass numbers, especially with the stadium, the new arena, and suddenly you've got 7,000 more seats than you had when they were at the field house. It really does become one of those where you need a figure who can tell the fans, here's the expectations, live within these, much like you need that coach to tell the players the same thing. And I think especially in these circumstances, when you're trying to build a fan base right alongside a football program, it's not optional. And that's where we're really lucky that Cignetti is here, because I think he intuitively understands those things. And that's probably what's made this such a successful thing with fans and why you've had so much interest. It's not just the success on the field, but there is a charismatic figure at the center of it all who they can tie themselves to. And that person becomes they're like the drum major, kind of telling everybody what they should be doing and when they should be doing it. And you feel like you're a part of it in a way that we just frankly haven't felt like a part of it. I mean, I remember I've gotten into arguments with people about this for years, this idea that it was the fans' fault that IU football wasn't better and that fans need to show up. There need to be people in the stands. And my argument was always, show up for what? Like the success has to be there first, and then the fans show up. It doesn't work the other way.
Yeah. No, you've obviously been watching some of our prior material, because yes, part of our show on the cascade effect of success was exactly that.
Yeah.
You do not win and then get recruits. You don't have fans show up and then start winning. It's actually the other way around. So you're totally right, Galen. That's exactly the right insight.
It's the old Sun Tzu thing, right? The losing general goes to war and then figures out how to win. The successful general wins and then goes to war.
War. Exactly. So when we come back, we're going to take a short break. When we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about, IU is the nouveau rich, as we just kind of delve into that, but how the nouveau rich deals with the criticism from up on top of the hill from our good friends down south. When we come back on X's and Joe's.
Hoosier Nation, are you tired of the same old takes? Say hello to Crimson Cast, the podcast that actually knows IU sports. Hosted by Galen Clavio and Scott Caulfield, they serve up sharp analysis, real talk, and just enough sarcasm to keep things interesting. Game previews? Check. Instant reactions? Double check. History lessons that make even our losses worth remembering? You bet. So whether you're tailgating at Memorial Stadium, pacing around Assembly Hall, or just avoiding Purdue fans, Crimson Cast has you covered. Search Crimson Cast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and join the conversation today.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. Mike and I are joined by our good friend, Dr. Clavio.
Clearly, we need to cut more promos. That feels self-serving to play that when I'm on the show. So
I think it's great. We are all about shameless self-promotion around here. We're all for it.
Yeah, you know us, Galen. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you start seeing me with energy drinks here, you got problems.
right, yeah.
Myself,
I'm looking. You need your Hello Fresh promotion, Bob. I think is the next one for you. So
that or Grammarly. Grammarly would be another good one for us.
Grammarly,
we could do Grammarly. That'd be right up our alley.
Grammarly or Audible, perhaps.
Audible. Yeah. So as we look at, we broke into the country club, and the question is, are we Carl the groundskeeper or Al? And I think, did we blow everything up, or are we blowing it up, or are we just gonna take the advantage of knocking it off? I mean, I think at the end of the day, Judge Smales got a little mad, and we've poked that bear pretty effectively. But I don't. I mean, and I'm going to go ahead and just mix the two here, because there has always been the regional battle in college football. Really it has been the Midwest versus the South. The coasts have their things, but a lot of times I think the coasts are not as nearly as invested. Now, you can make some exceptions for UCLA and especially USC in football. You have some other thoughts on the maybe on the East Coast as well, but it's not really a big thing in the Northeast. But I think in this situation, it's like, here we are relitigating the war between the states, and it's the Indiana Volunteers, the Indiana regiments are being critiqued by our good friends, led by General Paul Feynman, the Robert E. Lee of the SEC Media Brigade, trying to negate whatever is happening up here with the idea of, it's just harder in the South. I mean, our boys are better than your boys. Our coaches are better than your coaches. And it's just harder to win the SEC, obviously. I mean, don't you all know that? And I'm not really sure how that's kind of that's why I think in so many ways this season, not just for Indiana, for the Big Ten, really, is kind of a pivotal one to just say, okay, we have two major power conferences now, and maybe the casualties are the Big 12 and the ACC.
Yeah. Strangely, and Bob, you've probably heard me talk about this before. I've been on the other side of this argument many times in the past, right? Like I've said before on this show, I enjoyed many free drinks and dinners from my Notre Dame friends that refused to accept that the Irish had no shot versus Alabama in that 2013 title game. If you take just like the standard criteria that you look at, like championships, head to head and all that, it is undeniable that the SEC in the past has had many runs of success that are several standard deviations higher than the Big Ten. Like, just consider, I mean, I'll read this off real quick and see if you can see some kind of, let's say, geographical correlation for the national championship winners from 2005 to 2022. That goes in order: Texas, Florida, LSU, Florida, Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, FSU, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, LSU, Alabama, Georgia. I think that's the world that Feinbaum and all of them are sort of like living in terms of, what's going on in their head in this conversation about what's happening right now. My problem, I guess, with it is just the fact that, there's just been a lot of changes that have taken place. A lot of those realities just aren't the same anymore. If you look at the head-to-head records, let's say go back in the 2000 teens, yeah, the SEC is way ahead of the Big Ten. Right now, where does it stand? Well, I mean, Big Ten's won 5 of the last 6 head-to-head against the SEC. Galen was talking about, like some of the bowl season last year. Who did South Carolina and Alabama lose to? Big Ten teams.
Big Ten teams.
Who's won the last 2 national championships? Big Ten teams.
Big Ten teams.
Even and one of the biggest ones, and you'll see SEC media folks talk about is, well, there's just a huge gap in talent. And that, again, was very true back in the 2000 teens. I mean, in the 2013 NFL draft, the SEC had 63 draftees. You want to guess about how many the Big Ten had?
25.
Close, 22.
Oh, I lost the washer and dryer on the showcase. Damn.
Exactly. And you went over. That's the problem, Bob.
That's my problem. I went over. Oh.
So literally almost 3 times the amount of talent was like a pouring out of the SEC versus the Big Ten. Now the gap is 79 to 71. That's the one area where the SEC still has a little bit of a gap right now. And so I think that's, again, the problem is that this was true. It's just not as true as it was, some years back. And right now, the SEC and their media folks, I mean, they're playing this kind of weird 3-card Monty, heads I win, tails you lose game of logic, where anytime one, let's say, argument or one point of analysis favors the SEC, they will say that's one you pay attention to. And then if a few months later, if that very same point flips and is favorable to the Big Ten, well, you don't pay attention to that anymore.
And remember, the South was winning the war by number of battles until Sherman's torching Atlanta. And remember that Tennessee fell first, in the Civil War, but they also fell in Columbus, Ohio, if I recall correctly. And that kind of surprised the hell out of the volunteer fan base was like, it was like the day or two after IU loses to Notre Dame. So everyone's like, obviously
it was the next day.
The next day. And I mean, IU was at least had some shines of life. If I recall, Tennessee really pretty much just floated up dead to the top of the pool there.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Ooh, where to begin? I mean, so a preamble to all of this, going back to Bob's original question of are we Carl or are we Al? One of the big things the Big Ten has had to learn, and I'm still not totally certain they've learned it, is when one of your own rises up as a challenger to the national spectrum, don't beat them down immediately. Like, there's a fascinating period in IU athletics history that not a lot of people know about, which is that period from 1956 to 1960, when IU, tired of getting beaten by Purdue and being the bottom team in the Big Ten, goes out and hires a coach that they feel can win in what at the time was the modern style. His name was Phil Dickens. He had to serve a year of probation at the beginning because he had violated NCAA rules while at Wyoming. Then he comes in and they immediately start doing what you had to do to win at that point, which is going out and offering money to players to come play football. And that resulted in a 5-3-1 record in that first full year. There's a shirt, the Dickens Boys, that you'll see, that light blue T-shirt. If you've ever seen that, that's where that came from. But what happened was they immediately got reported to the NCAA, not by SEC schools, but by Michigan and Ohio State, who I think may have lost 1 or 2 recruits. And they were like, you're not allowed to do that. And Indiana ended up getting their entire athletic department put on 4 years of postseason ban from 1960 to 1964. It essentially ruined the end of the Branch McCracken era in basketball. Mm-hmm. It kept the Councilman and Billingsley program from getting completely off the ground as a national champ until the mid-60s. It had a bunch of knock-on effects. I say all that because one of the lingering questions about college football today is, are we going to see conferences move to uneven distribution of revenue, which is happening in the ACC. Up to this point, the Big Ten and the SEC have said, no, we're going to evenly split this. But keep in mind, the real villain in the Big Ten for its entire history has not been Ohio State. It's been Michigan. I have no question that Michigan would lead the charge to say we deserve more money and more consideration than anybody else. And sure, Ohio State and Penn State can have it, but Indiana and Wisconsin and Iowa and Michigan State certainly cannot. This is the same mentality they used to, cheat their way to a national title and then act like everybody else was doing it. It's in their blood. So putting that aside and talking about the larger question of the longstanding cultural battle here between the North and the South as it relates to football. The SEC did not really achieve its current position in college football prior to, I would argue, like that first Steve Spurrier team that really emerged in the mid-90s. And yes, I know that Alabama won under Gene Stallings in 1992. It wasn't like the SEC wasn't in the mix, but they didn't really start to ramp up as the college football conference until that period. And that was when the talent recruiting changed. Florida became the hot spot for recruits, and everybody feasted off of it. And I think what, the most important element of all of that was the Miami program started to fall down. And a lot of those recruits didn't automatically go to Florida State. They were going to Florida. They were going to other SEC programs. The SEC did a wonderful job of capitalizing on that. They got, some excellent coaching hires. And I think they modernized their football in a way that the Big Ten steadfastly refused to do, because the Big Ten, while it certainly is on the same footing or slightly ahead of the SEC in terms of its finances, the Big Ten is way, way, way too into itself and what it does as being the right way, the only way. And there's a haughtiness about the way the Big Ten carries itself in terms of rules and approach and I always felt like, well, we've got the Pac-10 as our partner in this, and we're the ones that are the intellectual and emotional leaders of all of this. And that SEC thing, they're not serious about academics. We're doing both. And that, unfortunately, I think allowed the Big Ten to get significantly outmaneuvered in talent acquisition, in coaching, in style of play, and in marketing. And the marketing matters, because ultimately, if everybody thinks that you're the best, you're going to be perceived as the best, even if you might not necessarily be. But in this case, perception matched reality in terms of talent. And so I think the Big Ten finally figured that out. Urban Meyer coming into the conference was a huge help because he understood what it took to win in that conference. And it's been a slow but steady addition now of coaches who, and Jim Harbaugh, for whatever we might talk about him, in his kind of oddities as a human being, understood what it took to put together a winning program. Curt Cignetti was trained at the foot of Nick Saban and understood what that took. And I think you're slowly seeing this sea change now. But the other piece, and I'll shut up, is like the money is now equal. And where Big Ten schools, many of them were not willing to overtly pay players under the table the way that SEC schools were willing to do for many years. Now it's not under the table. It's just part of the process. And that has created this great equalization of talent across the board, not so much in recruiting, because that is still kind of heavily biased towards the SEC, plus a couple of Big Ten schools at the top of the heap. But in terms of the second and third year players, the ones that may get recruited as a 4 or 5 star to a Tennessee or an Alabama, and then they're like, wait, I got to sit 4 years before I get a chance to be a starter? Why don't I just go to Minnesota or go to Indiana and play? That has allowed for the advantages that the SEC had in terms of stockpiling talent to disappear to some degree. And then you add into that the fact that the Big Ten just generates more money at a time when money has never mattered more than it currently matters. That all of those factors, I think, have contributed to Indiana emerging at just the right time, to where as long as Indiana is continuing to put money in and has someone who understands what they're doing, there's no reason why they can't stay in the country club as they move forward.
One thing as you were talking about that was style of play in particular. You know, Mike, we've talked about this a lot also with Big Ten style of play versus the SEC and kind of talking about the athletes. And now when the athlete gap shifts, your style of play shifts as well. You go back to that era of the 90s and you look at the programs that were in ascension, whether it was Wisconsin, whether it was Northwestern, Iowa, when Ferenz took over for Fry. Hayden Fry in the late 90s. The one exception was Purdue, who kind of did what they call basketball on turf. You know, Joe Tiller came in and just basically started running 4 and 5 receiver sets and just kind of changed. But for Purdue, which is called itself quarterback U, it made sense for Purdue to try that sort of that sort of MO. But you look at how those Big Ten teams did it. They did it through defense and ground game. They did it through building lines that could push and control the ball. And yeah, they could throw it a little bit, but for the most part, these teams were looking at building defense first, 17-10 thriller type of teams to get to the Rose Bowl. And then they could actually be competitive against teams like USC, UCLA, whichever the Pac, Oregon at that time, whoever the Pac-10 was throwing out, Arizona State as well, and when Jake Plummer was there. There were some exceptions. I think that you look at the Lloyd Carr teams at Michigan, they were playing a more modern style of football, especially with Brian Greasy as quarterback, and they were kind of moving in that direction with more of that NFL talent. I think John Cooper at Ohio State did a lot of that as well. He has had a lot of talent that never really did what the fan base needed him to do, which kept his chip stack at a point where it was easily beatable on one hand or one bad season. So you kind of look at those two programs, but the Ascension programs were the ones that they built themselves differently than the legacy programs, and in a way that really didn't attract the best talent or 4-star talent. It was more, and then Wisconsin kind of does that with their basketball program to ascend it that way. So you kind of look at this model in the Big Ten of doing it right was, let's do more with less. Let's be Midwestern frugal. Yeah. Instead of instead of building, large monuments in the South and large 3-story plantation type homes and ostensibly showing your wealth in such a way that just kind of is gaudy to anybody that's maybe north of US 50 or maybe even the Ohio River.
Yeah, and the problem with that is obviously that didn't really yield anything on the national level. And what you were left with was, well, we did it the right way. Mm-hmm. And the number of people who used to care about that as the primary thing is always fascinating to me, because I feel like that whole paradigm was a great excuse for, it was kind of like IU torpedoing their own basketball program in the Kelvin Sampson thing. It wasn't like, well, let's circle the wagons, we'll fix this internally. It was like, let's prostrate ourselves so that we can show that we followed the rules. Well, where did that get you guys?
We're mediocre but dignified.
Right.
But I mean, we are talking to the man who did the research on Phil Dickens and Kelvin Sampson. I believe, was it your dissertation on that?
Well, it wasn't my dissertation. That was a paper that was published in the Indiana Journal of History. Yeah.
Right. And we have read such work. I found it randomly on Google and go, wait a minute, I know that guy. What the hell?
when academia comes back to bite you on a podcast, it's amazing. Yes.
I'm like, wait a minute.
That'll only happen on our podcast.
Only happen on ours. But
people have enough time to do that.
but I think
but the Phil Dickens thing really kind of comes back because Indiana and we were is probably the word I want to use now. Mm-hmm. And our generation and before us, Dr. Wells took a hit on that. We all know that he took a hit on that.
Yeah.
Among others, many, many others. And that's when Bob Knight comes in and says, well, the rules are the rules, and I'm going to do it the right way. The legend, and that's the thing, is that lore and legend and folklore, as we talk about a lot, and just the three of us when we're having a beverage or two, or Mike and I are kind of doing this or doing this other or whatever we're talking about, the folklore matters. The story behind it And sometimes you don't even realize why you do it, but you know you do it, and then it just becomes ingrained in your culture, and you have to beat it out.
There's a podcast I've been wanting to propose doing with you guys, but I haven't because I don't know where it would go. But the hypothesis of the podcast is that Bob Knight's adherence to the rules to such a close degree had very little to do with the rules and the desire to follow them, and more a way to keep himself from getting bored. Because in the first 8 years of being the head, or 10 years of being the head basketball coach, he won 2 national titles, should have been the Olympic head coach, and had an undefeated season, and nearly had another undefeated season. I remember him having, there was in 84, 85, when IU had like their one bad season that decade, and they missed the NCAA tournament. There's a passage, I forget if it was in Season on the Brink or if it was in Alford's book. I think it was in Alford's book, where there's a passage where he's on his radio show and he made some comment about how, there was a lot of criticism from outside, and he's like, we're trying to do something special here at Indiana. And, if I wanted to, I could just go up to Indianapolis to all the folks with money and get a bunch of money. We could go buy the best basketball team and win a bunch of games that way. But, that's not what this program's about, which always struck me like an odd thing for him to say, because it's like, well, what is like the idea of what we're doing here has always kind of been a tension, because much like Penn State and this whole idea that Joe Paterno was running, the grand experiment, right? That was the whole thing. People forget this now.
Yeah, true.
Like athletics.
Libraries.
Oh, no, believe me.
Yeah.
Mike, you see it.
And what bothers me about that approach is, and Notre Dame, like, fully drunk the Kool-Aid on this as well. It's like, well, we win, but we do it the right way. And the implication is, unlike those unwashed bastards down in, in the South who don't do it the right way. And it's like, we know from what's happened that we've learned at Penn State, what happened at Notre Dame under Lou Holtz. You're not really doing things necessarily in any better or more moral way. I think with Knight, it was like, I could, if I wanted to, if I get the best basketball players, I could go out and beat anybody, and I could probably go undefeated multiple times. But it's essentially not a challenge to me. I mean, there's a reason why he nearly left to go work for CBS after the national title in 81. It's like, I'm 41 and I've done everything I can possibly do in this industry. It's not hard for me anymore. But institutionally speaking, I feel like the way that the Big Ten and all these Midwestern programs started to approach this in the 70s and 80s was like, we have a higher calling than just winning. And if we can't do it on our terms, we're not going to do it at all. I mean, that was Jim Delaney, who was the commissioner of the Big Ten for 30 plus years, famously said in like 2013 or 2014, well, if they start paying players, a bunch of Big Ten programs are going to drop down to Division III, because that's not what we're in it for. I don't know if we want to call up the standings of 2025. I think everybody's still here. I just want to note that.
Maybe they just didn't get the memo.
I'm just sitting here thinking, call that bet, and then looking at the Big Ten Network, and they're going, wait, how much money do we have to give up?
Yeah.
Oh crap!
Like hell, this is not happening. Fine. Take 20 million of it. We'll renegotiate 50 cents on the damn channel. We can make this happen.
Yeah, it's just that, and so I don't know. When I get down to it, it's like there are eras, and I feel like we had about a 40-year era where like the Big Ten was clearly the dominant the conference for a large part of the 20s, 30s, 40s into the 50s. And yes, you had other programs pop up, but like second tier Big Ten teams were winning national championships. Michigan State won national championships in the 60s. Minnesota won championships. Illinois won championships. Like this has been the pendulum was over there at that point because of the resources and the fact that the country was essentially powering its industrial engine off of all of these population centers in the Midwest, which were also being used to feed these
Right.
football factories in Ann Arbor and in South Bend and elsewhere. Well, then it swings, and now the Sun Belt has all of this athletic talent, and of course, so now though I feel like there's economic mobility horizontally across the college football landscape, and the Big Ten and I'm surprised, frankly, we got here, actually figured out a way to address that and get back in the game at a time when I wasn't sure they'd be willing to do so.
Yeah. Well, obviously the money was, as more cash was, being dumped in through the BCS and, with the sponsorships, obviously that probably lowered some of that threshold that Commissioner Delaney had put out for the conference and allowed us to actually reach those heights that you're talking about, Galen. And yeah, I mean, also just the flattening out, I mean, also happens with recruiting. I mean, you think about years back, there's some of the players you're seeing that are now starring at, let's say, like Ohio State or Michigan. I think back in 10, 20 years ago, much less chance they would have escaped Florida State, Alabama, Miami. I mean, going into this year, I think the two best players at Ohio State are Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. Smith's from Miami and Downs is from Georgia. It's true again. Now going back, that some of what the SEC media folks are saying is directionally true. That the southern states do produce more top 500 recruits and vaguely have more NFL draftees. So that part's true. It's just that it doesn't always accrue to the advantage of SEC schools, because the Big Ten and other schools are just coming in and they're sweeping up their share of those kids too. While at the same time, Ohio State could go into the state of Ohio, which is a massive wellspring of NFL level talent. And they basically have that state to themselves. Yep. It's very difficult. I mean, you get a few kids from might leak over to Penn State, or, some might commit heresy and go to Michigan. But for the most part, Ohio State has that state kind of locked down for upper tier talent. And then one angle I'm curious about, Galen, I mean, we talked about, sort of like at the I guess the institutional level. I'm curious about the media angle and like how you view it. Because I mean, to me, and I think I've told Bob this before, it seems to me like Fox and NBC took, what was basically largely a regional Southern brand in NASCAR and worked tirelessly to transform it into something like, a nationally viewed sport. On the flip side now, it almost seems like ESPN is, whether intentionally or possibly accidentally, they're taking a national brand in college football and are desperately bludgeoning it into a regional Southern centered sport. Now, I mean, it is weird to me. I mean, I didn't see this live, but is it true? Did Feinbaum really pledge that if another Yankee school wins the title, he's going to pull a John Breckenridge and literally skedaddle out of the country?
I hope. I didn't actually see that, but that would be amazing. But no, it's if we can get him. It's funny because the regionality argument is a fascinating one to me. There's a couple of things worth noting though on that front, because Fox and then eventually NBC with NASCAR, they were taking something that they were given to market and trying to figure out, is there a broader market for this than what CBS had been doing with it for years? And CBS was famous for kind of acquiring things. They did this with the NBA, where they just kind of had the NBA on and, famously were tape delaying finals games so that people could watch Dallas instead. Dallas, the TV series, not Dallas, not the Dallas Cowboys. But it was innovative from Fox, and I think it was a curious time because Fox needed a way to further embellish what they were doing with their network because they had just launched a few years earlier, and so it was like a perfect combination of a bunch of things coming together at once. Now, ESPN, what makes their relationship with the SEC and their approach to college football different is So this is where I need to back up and explain how the television rights work in college football. So there was a famous case in 1985 that involved a lawsuit filed against the NCAA by the Board of Regents for the University of Oklahoma, or Oklahoma University. And there were some other parties involved about television rights, because it used to be that the NCAA controlled all football and basketball television rights, and there were minimal games on television. And the argument was we should have more games on TV. The NCAA shouldn't be managing this. And the NCAA actually could have settled on this. They could have come to a brokered agreement. There was, in fact, the attorney for Oklahoma. Hold on. The attorney for Oklahoma was actually pleading with the NCAA to make this deal. But of course, the NCAA never met an obstacle they didn't want to just slam their head into repeatedly, as opposed to finding an alternate solution. So they chose to fight and lose, very similar to what you'll notice is happening today.
Sounds familiar.
And so instead of a brokered agreement where there's just more games on, but there's, at least some semblance of collective bargaining, you now have all the conferences doing all of the negotiations on their own. And of course, it's interesting. I don't know if you guys saw this, but one of the new things that's popped up is an effort to repeal or alter the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, which is the act that gives limited antitrust exemptions to professional football, professional basketball, professional hockey, and baseball to collectively negotiate television deals. College conferences do not have that ability, so they all have to operate individually. College football playoff negotiates rights, but that's the college football playoff. It's just that. So the reason I give you all that background is the way that Fox works with the Big Ten. Fox owns 61% of the Big Ten network. The Big Ten schools own 39% of the Big Ten network directly. So they aren't just being provided money from Fox. They are owners in the network. And they also obviously have a national package that involves Big Noon and all of the games that are on Fox. And they have a separate package that NBC uses for their evening games, and a separate package now with CBS for their afternoon games. And the SEC doesn't work that way. So all of that preamble, the SEC doesn't own part of the SEC network. It's, I think, 80% ESPN owned and 20% owned by Hearst Television. So ESPN and Hearst are cutting checks to SEC teams. But that means that the ESPN has a vested interest in making that property as valuable as possible, especially since their other investments, which all occurred about 10 years ago, the ACC network, which they desperately didn't want to do because they knew it was a business losing proposition, and the Longhorn network, which no longer exists. The SEC was kind of the cash cow there. So the thing is, they became so obsessed with that infrastructure and how it plugged into ESPN Plus and how it plugged into the SEC network that they essentially allowed all those other deals to go by the wayside in terms of bidding. And that's why there are no Big Ten games on ESPN unless they are owned by, like, the rights for that game are owned by an SEC team. So the idea that ESPN has tried to essentially take a national sport and make it regional is a great observation. And it's unfortunate because college football as a whole, in order to survive and thrive, really needs to be a national thing. It needs to be, yes, it's always going to have some regionality. It's always going to matter greatly in the South, but it also matters greatly in the Midwest. It matters greatly in the Plains. And I think the problem and the real critical issue here, and where we're seeing some media bypass happening, is that ESPN's singular focus on promoting the SEC, because it's a business thing for them, is causing them to be viewed as hostile to other schools and conferences. And that is not helping anybody. And I think ultimately, as we go down this pathway, and until and unless ESPN and the SEC realize that they can't go it alone, that they really need to be more collective in how they approach this, I don't know that we ever get a good reconciliation as far as how all this plays out in terms of the real, like, vibe of college football and how fans are receiving it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was having a conversation with one of my friends in the South that was kind of taking the Feinbaum angle relative to the Big Ten and IU. And I was pushing back on him, sort of in line with what you're saying, Galen. Like, if you really want your sport to only be viewed by those who dine at Bojangles, go ahead and mandate that SEC teams with 3 losses will get a slot in the championship bracket over 1-loss Big Ten teams. If you make every other conference effectively into to have their regular season schedules be almost like an exhibition, where it really doesn't matter. As long as you're Ohio State, Michigan, you can get across. But anyone else, if you actually have a 1-loss miracle run, it won't matter, because we're going to make sure that 3-loss South Carolina gets in.
Well, it's like, a person who will remain nameless, but is an important player in the whole thing, is like, Indiana becomes the little engine that could last year. And half of college football fandom and almost all of college football media is brainwashed into rooting for the Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, that should be, as much as we celebrate the underdog, as much as we celebrate the new achiever in college basketball when they make a Final Four, it's like we are pre-programmed to go the opposite direction in college football. And that, there's a lot of different rationales for why that occurs. I mean, some of it is media driven, and it's because narrative and trying to put forward something that's easy to digest, where you don't have to explain things to people that are new. That is a real thing in terms of how, because like when you're trying, and part of the problem here is the 24-hour a day video cycle, and how you've always got to have new stuff. And this idea that, well, we're not going to be able to slowly onboard people into learning about who Indiana is. Let's just say, well, they're fake and they have a terrible schedule, and that's that, and just ignore the fact that that same applies to basically everybody else in the SEC. Like, let's create a fake equivalency of, oh, they don't have a tough non-conference schedule. Meanwhile, they're playing the exact same number of power conference teams as 12 out of the 16 SEC teams. Like, we're just not even going to mention that nuance.
Yeah.
But part of it is also, I think, there's a real college football is maybe this is going to sound really strange. College football might be the least egalitarian sport from a structural perspective. And in that, it is very English in its background. And if you think about the way that the Premier League is generally approached by media and by fans, it's like, unless you're one of the 3 or 4 brands that's recognized as supposed to be there, if you are an interloper, you are immediately almost viewed as like a contagion that needs to be expelled from the system. And I think that occurs with Indiana. It's occurred with other programs that have kind of, try to break through the glass ceiling a little bit. It is the Mean Girls Club. It's not going to get any better. Like, this is the thing. I love the fact that Kurt Cignetti has decided to go ahead and just take this stuff head on. And I love the fact that IU fans don't back down in online fights. IU's never going to be beloved amongst other college football fans. Like, the fact that you're in the mix now, what admiration you initially got from some of those fans and programs is going to eventually turn into resentment and dislike. And that's just how it goes. And we are so not used to being the bad guy. Like, we had the bad guy status, even though we didn't realize it in the 70s and 80s and early 90s with basketball. Like, IU was the evil empire. We were how people think about Alabama in football. Or how people think, about, well, how you used to think about Kentucky when they were, in that mode. So, but it's been so long, and IU fans lived in such a bubble in basketball that we didn't realize that we were viewed as the evil empire, because a lot of people fundamentally liked how IU played and how Bob Knight coached, even if many of them wouldn't admit it. But even there, Knight knew that, and Knight was he approached it from a philosophical and from a verbal standpoint where it's like, yes, we do things a special way here. And I think that it's great Cignetti's doing this, but we talked earlier about having to educate the fan base as we go along. The fan base is going to find that they are in a sport and a discourse around that sport that is very fundamentally different from anything they've dealt with before. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how they deal with that.
It's interesting kind of going through all of this in my head and realizing that oh boy, we get to be the evil empire. We get to be the rebels that nobody likes, that the empire hates. It's like there's almost this thing of like, oh, the nuisance that we get to provide to this is actually, we'll have to learn how to do this in many respects. But I kind of look at this. I mean, when you start talking about like the sectional, because how Mike brought up a great point using NASCAR. And I thought it was really fascinating because I was watching a little bit of the Daytona race and I was hearing NBC doing crossovers with the NBA and kind of trying to figure out, kind of where the Venn diagram on NASCAR and NBA is even in this modern media landscape for fans. But NASCAR grew because people like Tony George let them into Indianapolis. NASCAR grew because Bill Franz was brilliant in putting tracks all over the United States and having marketable individuals who could then, wasn't Dale Earnhardt. You could make Dale Earnhardt the bad guy, Jeff Gordon the good guy. There may be something where it's like, if you want to expand the base of people who are watching, and I think this is one problem the SEC has, because you're already selling your stadiums out. Even your lousy teams have sellouts. Even your lousy teams, it's a cultural event to go to a tailgate party in the South. At a Old Miss or even a Vanderbilt, the Commodore Navy floating down to go to the games. So at this point where, now, but if you want more eyeballs going in and you want to bring like a large alumni base and fan base at IU, if you want to see Minnesota or Wisconsin kind of grow more as well, you have to be expansionist. And, Feinbaum can't go to Canada and look to get British support for this. He can't, and we can't intercede him at the border and have the 21st century Trent affair. Bing.
I would love to pull Feinbaum like off of an ironclad, and
he's on a blockade runner shooting up the Rutgers the Rutgers militia Navy gets him in. Puts him in a cell in Trenton, the stockade in Trenton. I'm kind of seeing this this sort of mindset where it's like, okay, so either you expand or die, which is what the Big Ten did by basically cannibalizing the Pac-10 or the Pac-12. The SEC cannibalizes Oklahoma and Texas. They thought they were being really sneaky going over. Well, not really, because then what the Big Ten did they just basically went from coast to coast. So now you have literally the entire country funneling down into the South. You have the country here, the South here, but football's different in the South. It's an event here. Well, what else is going on Saturdays in the fall sports-wise?
Right.
Maybe playoff baseball.
Yeah.
And not people are watching NASCAR like they used to either. So that's kind of my thought here is that you now have destination and event television, and all you have to do is walk into. There's a bar I was at in Denver, Colorado, and all these kids are in this bar. This is 3-4 years ago, and there's multiple TVs with multiple games, and the Iowa people are trash talking the Texas people, or because all these kids from these institutions are going to these large urban centers, and they want to connect with their alma maters.
Yeah.
Well,
and with each other. And,
exactly.
The thing about this that's tough for us as IU fans is that this is a new club that just you haven't had the ability to be a part of for the longest time because you just haven't had the teams. I mean, you had the whole chaos team thing where, in the Kevin Wilson era, like you got close and you'd play entertaining games, but you'd lose. And that was a little bit of something, but this is a whole different order. And look, here's the thing. I lived in the South. I worked in the South as a sports broadcaster. I've been to the Grove. I've been to Auburn for a game, and I've been to a tailgate at Auburn. There's clearly a very strong cultural phenomenon that goes on with football, but we have great football culture in the Midwest too. It's different because the underlying cultures are different. Where they came from is different. Like the Scots-Irish background and the African-American backgrounds that comprise the Southern cultures that we know and love are much fundamentally different from the the working class German immigrants and the Eastern Europeans that became the Midwestern culture. And there's nothing inherently right or wrong with either of them. They are their own things. They manifest in different ways. But you can't tell me if you've been to Iowa or Wisconsin or Ohio State or Penn State, or, I mean, there's so many great examples of places you go where the culture around football, the culture around tailgating is strong. It was strong at Indiana. It was a great, it was, and it still is. The never lost a tailgate thing, like the root of that is Hoosiers love a party. We just had nothing to go to after the party happened. And I think what IU fans are learning is that if the product in the stadium is good, it makes that party even more electric. And you should want to grow the game. Now, you're not going to be able to have everybody good every year, but you should want to grow the game. You should want to be universal. But this is where the structure of college football hurts itself, because there's nobody in charge watching out for the good of the sport, the good of the fans. And what I find perverse about the way that the current media discourse operates around college football is that people are pointing the finger at the Big Ten with the denuding of the Pac-12 tree, the proposals for the expanded playoff, the change of the schedule to involve fewer Power 4 conference opponents. They're like, this is what's wrong with things, and this is getting away from the fans. And the SEC is being held up as some kind of model of what's right and what's doing the fans well. And it's like, you're kidding yourselves. Like, the SEC is interested in the SEC. They're not interested in the good of the sport as a whole, but that's what's being held up as what somehow is best for the sport as a whole. And that drives me nuts.
And sometime this year, during the when Thanksgiving ads are being run, targeted Thanksgiving ads are being run during the games, it'll be a game on some sort of ESPN, back thing where Alabama's going to be playing Nebraska Teachers and Barbers College to tune up for the Iron Bowl. Yep. There's always that game in November that they forget about, that, it's like towards the end of the season where they just decide to go beat somebody 76-0 so they can rest their starters for the second half. Yeah, at some point, you got to kind of pull the BS card and call it what it is. Yeah. And I think that's what I think that's kind of the whole point. And we decided to call this the football show because it is the football show, because at the end of the day, what we really are talking about is how to be successful in college athletics. And in order to do so, and it was true, it really wasn't true at one point in time, because schools like Kentucky, Kansas, and Indiana could do it in basketball without doing it in football. But to be successful in other sports, you have to have the revenue generated by football. And so Scott Dolson gets it. I think a lot of our fans are getting it more and more. The Big Ten revenue isn't what it used to be, where everybody just always got a nice big piece of the pie, including the gates. Things have changed. So now we're at a point where, as the conversation continues, and as we kind of wrap this, I think, Mike, as you've looked at this also, do you think, not only is it real, but where do you think IU is it going to kind of, is it going to be something where somebody can replicate? I mean, I know that's what you're going to be watching, but how hard is it going to be to replicate this?
Well, I mean, to get exactly what Cignetti had coming out of James Madison, you're going to need, I would suppose, a highly successful coach at the lower tier that's basically has a top 25 ranked team and roster, that he goes to a Power 5 school or Power 2 or whatever, and basically takes all of his best players. They will release like the big chunk of them, and is able to add on several different, top tier NFL ready additions from other schools. A kid from Ohio, a kid from
mid-majors,
all the other schools. Yeah. So will it be replicated? I'm sure somebody at some point down the road will do something like it, maybe even a little bit better. I just don't think it's very likely. It's not something like, I'd be very surprised if I can count like 4 or 5 examples that do basically exactly what Cignetti did last year.
So you're saying this isn't a model?
I'm saying that when people say, who is this year's Indiana? I think they're deluding themselves. They're looking for something that's not going to be happening on a yearly basis, like it's the winter solstice. Well, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, this year's Indiana thing is hilarious because what I think people really mean by this year's Indiana is who's going to make the playoff that didn't make the playoff before. Not what the question should be, which is who's going to go from a 3-win season to making the college football playoff and setting a school record for most wins in a season, because that's what you'd have to be. Like when people are like, Illinois is this year's Indiana. It's like, no, they're not. Illinois won 10 games last year. You know, like if Purdue does that and somehow goes 11-1, they would be this year's Indiana, but that's not going to happen.
And they wouldn't like be called that either.
No.
That would be the ultimate hit for him.
We're this year's Indiana.
That would be it.
Boiler
you
up.
really are. Now you really are little brother. I don't think of you as such. I just think of you as a nice neighbor that we just disagree with on. But now we can kind of just say, well, yeah, your Corvette's not as nice as mine. Yeah. We got ours first.
Amazing.
All right. Thank you, Galen. Always great to talk to you. And you know, it's a good warm-up for us because we'll be doing this in about a week and 6 hours. If you join us at the after party, possibly at upstairs or whatever we decide to go. Galen says upstairs, so we go where the general tells us. So
we'll make final plans next week. We got to see what the fog of war allows us at this point.
I understand completely. So, and we can't go. We just can't go hide in a cafe pizzeria anymore. So, in this situation, I think this is kind of the conversation we'll be having in the after party, with probably some more references to George Harrison, Steely Dan, and possibly Ken Burns and the Show Can Farewell. So, big thank you to Bob Thompson and John Rigger for the look and the sound of the show, and Mike. We'll see you. Make sure you let me know about the. And real quick on the coffee thing, I always we go to Bloomington to get coffee here. We go to the Sahara Mart or the World Mark now because they have the wall of coffee. So Bennett and I, 3Bs, we hop in the car, we drive over, sometimes grab dinner. We keep forgetting to text Galen and say, hey, you want to come with the kids? Because, you know, Bennett likes hanging out with like kids and stuff. So I've read that you're supposed to do that with your child. But no, we get the coffee. I was supposed to do it when he was in February. And so I said, Mike, got to get the coffee. We get up to Indianapolis to have brunch with some other friends of ours. I forgot to get the coffee. I'll drop you off at the airport. There's got to be a place to get coffee in Indianapolis. I forgot to get the coffee. I came home.
I was in the car when the phone call happened.
You forgot to get the coffee?
That was fascinating listening.
Coffee? What?
As soon as you said what coffee, I was like, oh, man. But it's okay. Everything turned out all right. We will not forget this time.
We will not forget this time.
All right. So. Until then, so this endless conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including the Assembly Call, Doing the Work, Dribble Drive, Crimson Cast, and our latest titles, Sideline Stories, Football Weather, and The Big Red Carpet on YouTube and BackHomeNetwork.com. So until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
I'm Bob Moats.
Take care, everybody.